Welcome to this episode of the Conscious Business Coffee Break, where we take a few moments to explore what's happening in the conscious business movement, expand awareness, and encourage your efforts in conscious business. Greetings, everyone. I'm Stephen Donaco of the Conscious Business Enterprise, a division of Humanities team. And on today's episode, I'm going to talk about awareness of our intrinsic motives in business. And it's partly inspired by the news of the recent suicides of Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain. And rather than talk about them directly, we're going to talk about the dynamics behind just how people are feeling underneath, because these are two people who would appear to have had everything. Like their lives are going great, they're successful, they both make good money, and then why is it that like it's so dark in one's life that no matter that all of these external indicators of success aren't enough, and they feel compelled to end it. So what I did was I looked up something to support talking about these issues, and there was an article that was published back in, I think it was January, from the LA Times, called "We Know Junk Food Makes Us Sick. Our Junk Value is Making Us Depressed." So I'll put a link to this in the comments to the video, and I'll also put a link to an item about the Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain, about just this depression and anxiety that is happening, particularly in America. But let me just get to the article from the LA Times, and I'll just read you the lead verbatim here. It says, "Junk food has taken over our diets, and it is making millions of people physically sick. A growing body of scientific evidence suggests that something similar is happening with our minds, that they have become dominated by junk values, and this is making us mentally sick, triggering soaring rates of depression and anxiety." So, article goes on to say that in the 1980s, a social scientist named Tim Kasser began his own scientific testing of this phenomena. So Kasser had understood that, generally speaking, there are two motives that drive human beings, and it's extrinsic motives and intrinsic motives. So, to give you an example from the article, imagine that you play the piano, and you play in the morning because it gives you joy. And if you're playing it simply for that, he would call that an intrinsic motive. You're doing it not to get anything out of it other than just for the experience, because it does give you joy. It's worth doing in and of itself. And the fulfillment that you feel is something that comes from within. Now, on the flip side of that, imagine you play the piano to impress your family. Let's say your parents push you to do it and you're pleasing them, or you play piano like in a dive bar that you hate going to, but you have to pay the rent, or you're playing the piano to impress or seduce somebody so that they'll have sex with you, for instance. These are all extrinsic motives. You're not doing them for the fulfillment of the experience, but you're doing it to get something out of it, something external. The fulfillment you think you will get is solely from outside of yourself. And let me just turn this to business for a moment, because think about our motives for being in business. Think about your motive for having the career that you've chosen. And granted, there are people, many people, thankfully, who are doing the work they want to do. They love it. They can't wait to get up every morning and do the work. But how many of us also are doing work that we can't stand, that it's hard to get up in the morning because we don't want to go to a job that we've hated and we've always hated. And as time goes on, it just gets harder and harder. So, what have our families or what have society told us about work and business and what our role, quote unquote, should be in it? Okay. So I just want to kind of park that idea or that thought off to the side for a moment as we ponder extrinsic versus intrinsic motives. Now, in Kasser's research, he found time and time again, and he researched this for a lot, he found that people who achieved their extrinsic goals didn't experience any increase in day-to-day happiness. So, for instance, things like promotions at your job, or a fancy new car, or your new cell phone, expensive jewelry. These things aren't found to actually improve happiness. They don't provide any intrinsic satisfaction at all. But people who achieve their intrinsic goals did become happier, significantly so. They became less depressed and less anxious. And their fulfillment increased as they worked at it. And when I say they worked at it, it means they made a conscious intention, right? So making a conscious intention to become a better friend to somebody, or to be a better parent, dancing, just simply because you enjoy it, and not to impress somebody, or just helping another person, not to get anything out of it other than to be of help, just because it's the right thing to do. So people who are focusing consciously on those things in their life, and I'm going to add to this, then working, right? So choosing a job or a career, or reinventing yourself in your vocational life in such a way that it gives you internal satisfaction. These are the things that studies have proved make us happier and more fulfilled. And it doesn't mean life is perfect by any means, and it doesn't mean there isn't struggle. However, by doing what we feel is right, it has a powerful effect on our psyche. Kasser discovered that peoples whose lives were dominated by these exterior values, these extrinsic values, had a worse time in almost every respect. They were physically sicker, they were angrier, they experienced less joy, they had more despair, their relationships were poor, and they felt more insecure. And it's of note that these findings aren't outliers. Kasser did 22 different studies, and found the more materialistic and extrinsically motivated one becomes, the more depressed that person will be. And then there were 12 studies that found that materialistic, or what we might call junk values, correlate with increased anxiety. So why is it then that our culture constantly pushes us to live extrinsically? So what is the problem? Or what's the fear in getting to know ourselves deeply and authentically, and then living from that place? So let me take a conscious business angle at this. And I'm going to just quote from the article again. It's a 1978 experiment. So it says, this experiment in 1978 helped to reveal how this process works. Researchers showed one group of young children 2 advertisements for a specific toy, and then they showed the second group no advertisements. Then they gave the children a choice: play with a nice boy who doesn't have the toy, or play with a boy who's not so nice but has the toy. The kids who hadn't seen the ad mostly chose the nicer boy, while the kids who had seen the ad mostly chose the less nice boy. So just 2 ads primed these kids to prefer an inanimate lump of plastic over human kindness and the possibility of a more meaningful connection. So what I gather from this is that to be a conscious consumer, right? Become aware of the non-conscious messages produced by advertising, and experiment for yourself. Do your own inner research on this. Experiment. Self-assess your own anxiety when you watch a commercial that triggers your perceived need to buy the thing the commercial is pitching, right? So, this is where there's buyer's remorse, right? We feel like we have to have the thing that's being advertised, or that we've seen, and then we buy it, and then there's this phenomenon called buyer's remorse, where shortly after buying it, we feel unfulfilled, or we feel bad, or we feel ashamed that we bought it. And just experiment for yourself. Watch advertisements and notice what they're provoking in you. If you don't buy into the advertising, you won't buy. It's as simple as that. And you might even experiment with stopping to watch TV for a while and just detox from the messages. I mean, I myself watch very little TV, if any. And I tell you, when I go to somebody else's house where the TV is on and I see advertisements, I notice the anxiety in myself, and I'm conscious of this. Like I'm conscious that like these messages aren't actually they're not real, right? I'm choosing to not allow them to have power over me, and I still feel the anxiety of the messages because these messages are so toxic, and this game that advertising plays on people's emotions is just so insidious. You can't help but feel it. So Kasser says ultimately the best antidepressant is to change our way of life. And of course, we do have a choice to do this. And consciously tuning out is a way to get there. And again, this doesn't mean that you go off in a mountain and you never come down. You can be in society and you can be a conscious consumer. You can be a conscious business person and do the right thing and feel that intrinsic fulfillment and focus your life on being a living consciously and being in harmony with all that is good and all that is life affirmative. So, through the lens of the Conscious Business Declaration, I see principle number 2 at work here, that the purpose of business, including advertising, ultimately, is to increase economic prosperity while contributing to a healthy environment and improving human well-being. And that means human physical well-being, it means human mental well-being, and it means human emotional well-being. So thank you all for tuning in today. I appreciate your presence as always. And get outside today. The weather was lovely, and we all can take care of ourselves by getting outside, being in touch with nature. So if the weather is agreeable where you are, please get outside and enjoy it. And then we'll see you again next week on Wednesday, 9 a.m. U.S. Central Time for another edition of the Conscious Business Coffee Break. Have a great weekend, everyone.